So, hello everyone. Good morning from Peru. Hello. So, for today, we are going to start with our first session that is going to be related the youth delegate programs. That is really important for each of us to work in diplomacy in global health, especially as young advocates for global health. So, for this session, we will have four really important guests, special guests that will guide us through all the implementation and challenges of this program. So I'm pleased to present our friend Franco Pego, who is going to moderate the session in general. He is currently the assistant to the liaison officer to the WHO and a well-known global health advocate. So Francisco, I give you the floor to start with the session.
Hello, Martha. Hello, everyone in the organizing committee. Hello, young advocates, and hello, people who are following us through YouTube. So, as Martha has just said, my name is Francisco Pego. I'm from Portugal, and I hold this LWHO assistant position in IFMSA. So, I will be here mostly as a moderator, as a facilitator for today, because today's session is not simply a capacity building session. We're also going to have here some special invitees, which will tell us some of their experience as either previous or future young delegates to the WHA. So I will be mostly here as a moderator. And as such, I will only take the first 10 minutes and then the last 10 minutes to make some introduction and then to mention some resources we have on this topic. And then most of the time, I will just be posting questions, both the questions I have in advance and the questions that you will send us, be it on YouTube or be it here inside Zoom link. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And then in 10 minutes, I will actually be presenting in a more detailed way the people who have here invited. But those are Sarah, Simeng, and Toby, who are already with us, but will be better introduced in 5 or 10 minutes. Okay? And this being said, I'm going to share my screen, which is where I have my presentation. And yes, here we are. I'm going to start the slideshow. So today we're going to speak about youth delegate programs, which is not only a thing relevant throughout the year, but also very specifically at the World Health Assembly, because it's a very relevant moment in which we can produce good advocacy on that. We will have an introductory part, a 101, and then a debate, which was thought as not simply a debate without anyone watching, was thought of a debate with people who are going to do advocacy on it watching, and as such has been tailored in that way. This is the agenda. We're going to have the introduction, then we're going to have the debate with some presentations with questions that have already been prepared at home, and then with your questions, and this is the most relevant part. And then we're going to debrief with also showcasing some relevant resources that we in IFMSA have produced on this topic. But before anything else, this is the experience I've got, which might be relevant to you so that you take it into context. I was national president of ANAM Portugal, and these made me an advocate at the national level for introducing a youth delegate program. I was also an IFMSA delegate to the WHA last year, just like you are now, and so I also tried to implement some strategies when I was going to Geneva last year, and now I'm the assistant, and this is my focus area, besides the fact that I have already been an IFMSA delegate to the EB meeting sooner this January. And as such, I have also tried to, from an international perspective, try and be an advocate for this topic. I'll also leave you here a QR code, which might be a good way for you to just point your camera and search for my Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever way you want to be in touch. Okay? And so, just like I did the previous session last week, today we're not going to go through the basics of WHO or the WHO interaction with IFMSA, because you've already been introduced to that, and the country office relations section of my presentation has already been done. So today I'm just focusing on youth delegate programs. For that, I would like to go through a quick reminder of how WHO decision-making goes. Time-wise, we have the World Health Assembly, the most relevant deciding body, the Executive Board meeting, which is like a preparatory meeting in which 34 member states have a special position, and also the regional committee sessions, which happen in all of the WHO regions. But besides time-wise, we also need to speak of who are these people, and there are 3 levels of participation: the WHO staff, which deal with the day-to-day matters, the member states, and here the relevant thing is that they have the voting rights, and therefore they have an influence And then the non-state actors in official relations, like IFMSA is an example of, which are people who are able to contribute, but they don't have a vote. And this is the relevant thing for the case I want to produce. IFMSA started being a non-state actor in official relations immediately in 1969 when this concept was created, and non-state actors can attend to these meetings I've spoken to you about, but they have a limited role because they can just produce some statements, but these statements don't have to be taken into consideration neither by the WHO staff, neither by the member states who are voting on things. But member states do. Member states have voting right and therefore have an influence. This goes through entering negotiations, influencing the right of resolutions, and therefore having an actual impact in the global health agenda. So the question is, how can we be more effective knowing all of this structure and taking it into consideration? And one of the proposals we have for that is through youth delegate program. What is a youth delegate? A youth delegate is a young person that is formally accredited on the country's official delegation. This contrasted to, for example, IFMSA delegation, just like you are, which don't have a role in your country delegation. You don't have the opportunity to influence a vote. You can only try to influence people through words, not through formal power. And so if someone is accredited as a youth delegate to a country's delegation, they will be able to access preparation meetings, informal negotiations, to deliver statements, and to provide any other kind of assistance. And this tries to show the case of how can we be more influential in the global health arena, still as a youth, but in another position in this second level of participation. But I would also like to showcase to you that this is not only a thing that comes from within, from the youth's intent to be represented more, there is also some institutional and a lot of, I would say, institutional support to this kind of participation. Actually, the UN General Assembly decided to advocate with the member states for the introduction of these formats of participation in 1996 in a document they produced about the turning of the millennium. Then the World Health Organization first put this into text as an official recommendation in 2018. And I would like to share with you some news that happened just this January, in which Dr. Tedros used his opening remarks of the executive board meeting to encourage, and I will say precisely as I said, I encourage all member states to meet our youth today, and to include youth representatives in our delegations to the World Health Assembly. So we have this kind of political official endorsement is something very relevant for us to be aware of. So if we want it and if we are officially endorsed to do, what should we do now? IFMSA's position for a task assortment proposal is that it's not going to be IFMSA that's going to have the recognition from each country as a representative of the youth, but your NMOs, you and other youth in our country can actually do the push for actual advocacy. And usually the main stakeholder for this, if you want to convince a youth delegate program to exist, is your government, usually the Ministry of Health, Foreign Affairs, or even youth. And IFMSA, what can we do? We can provide with resources and help along the way. This session and this debate we're going to have today is an example of those resources we can provide you with. I hope you can make the most of it. And I would also like to make a note before heading to the debate of the specificities of WHA advocacy. WHA is a very good opportunity for this kind of advocacy because you have people who are influential in the decision of whether or not to make a youth delegate program exist. And so I suggest you that most of the questions that you pose in the end are focused on that because we've got here people who have been to WHA or who have been to regional committees. Even me as a moderator will have some experience and I can share them. And so I hope that you can make the most of this opportunity. Without further ado, and before going to the conclusion part of this session, which is going to be about relevant resources, I would like to host a discussion among experienced people. I've just told you their names in the beginning, but I would like to go to a more thorough presentation now, and I see that I'm just fulfilling the 10 minutes I told you to that this introduction would take. And so here they are. So we have Sarah Beainis. She is a medical student in Beirut, Lebanon. I didn't mention to you, but the three people we're inviting come from three different WHO regions. And I hope this is a very good diversity opportunity so that you know it's not only in Europe, for example, that you can do this in many other places. I asked her for a summary of the most relevant experience that she brings here today. She's the regional assistant for the Eastern Mediterranean region for external affairs. She has been a youth delegate in the Lebanese delegation to the WHA 75, And she has been a NIFE-MSA delegate, so non-state actor, to WHA 74 and also to the PreWHA. And she has been also a NIFE-MSA delegate to a regional council in her area. Simengle is the current coordinator, so not delegate, but coordinator in charge of the youth delegate program for the WHO in the Netherlands. And she has also been an IFMSA delegate, but not to the WHO yet, only to the European Regional Committee. And also we have Toby here. Toby is the actually a PhD student of medical microbiology. Toby never studied medicine, so this is just an example of how non-restrictive to medicine these youth delegate programs have to be. And he is most relevantly the Canadian youth delegate to the WHO, so he's going to be with you in Geneva, and also to the Regional Committee of the Americas, which is PAHO. So we have these three people. I, of course, will also be here to pose the questions. And in case you think that my experience might be relevant, I will also say something on that. And without further ado, I would go to the two questions that we decided that we would do by default. And after those two questions, all the agenda is set by you. So feel the pressure. Whatever questions you have, just send them on Zoom or send them on YouTube. And we will have Marta here filtering the questions and posing them in the best way so that you can get the answer to them. Okay. So right now, I'm going to go to the first question. And I would propose that we go in alphabetical order for the first question, and then we can alternate so that not always the same person has to end or has to start. And the first question, and we start with Sarah in alphabetical order, and then Simeng, and then Toby, is what's your most relevant advice to these advocates about establishing a youth delegate program?
Okay, first of all, hi everyone. To avoid confusion, I'm also joining from a microphone, two devices. So that's why you can see me like on mute. I'm so happy to be here and to share my experience with you all. It feels like I'm at home. So like in order for me to give you an advice, I'll give you a bit of a story or a background. And based on that, I'll give you three basic advices. So first of all, like for the youth delegate program in Lebanon in 2019, there was already 2 youth delegates that went to the WHA with the ministry, like with the country delegation. But after that, during the pandemic, there was actually no more youth delegates going. And we tried to contact the ministry at the time to engage youth delegates, but they didn't actually agree because at the time, the ministry had other priorities. They were prioritizing more national work, especially that it was COVID pandemic era, it was Beirut blast happening, and it was economic crisis. So they weren't really prioritizing even international affairs or external meetings. Now, after COVID-19, so during the post-pandemic, if you want, recovery era, we had another minister, and this new minister had actually a vision, sorry, to include more youth, or not really youth, like to reshape, let's say, the health systems in Lebanon through engaging more civil society. And when we contacted them again, through contacting the permanent mission of Lebanon in the Geneva, they linked us with the minister, and they were already interested in having youth delegates or engaging civil society within these external meetings. And what helped as well was that we already had a previous connection or previous communication with the ministry. So we already had a trust established between LEMSIC and the ministry. So like as a conclusion, the three advices that I will give you, the first one is perseverance. So even if, for example, for 1 year, you tried to implement a youth delegate program and it didn't work out, try again next year. There's always a chance that the agenda or your national agenda will change and your national priorities will change. So the ministry might be interested during the next years to implement youth delegate programs. The second one is build trust. So during build trust through collaborations, other forms of collaborations with the ministry, with your ministry, through engaging them, first of all, inviting them to your events, and then trying to collaborate on bigger scale events, still achieving this level of diplomacy. So that's the second advice. The third advice, which is like try to mobilize or utilize this experience, like you being already youth delegates, not youth delegates, but IFMSA delegates to the World Health Assembly is really something to be proud of and to use it for your advantage. So in our case, the ministry, first of all, agreed on 1 youth delegate, but when they saw that we already have 3 people who were previously IFMSA delegates to the WHA, they agreed to have 33 youth delegates. So that just shows that you being now IFMSA youth delegates to the World Health Assembly will also play into your advantage while trying to convince the ministry into implementing youth delegate programs. So these are my 3 basic advices.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I won't be commenting for now because I think other people will have interesting input, but I would also like to wrap up things in the end with how youth delegate programs can be part of a larger relationship with one country's government or WHO country office. So, Simen, what's your largest piece of advice for these people?
Yes, thank you for the invite to speak here. And also thank you, Sarah, for the nice words already. So I can give you a bit of context about the Dutch Youth Delegate Program to start off my story about the advice. It is that our Youth Delegate Program was, it started all in 2016 already. And it all started off with one of our members from the NMO, who was also part of the IFMSA delegation like all of you. And she met up with the ministry. They sent them an email like, hello, I'm going to be in Geneva. Maybe we can talk about youth engagement there. And they had 2 meetings with member states, with the permanent representation in Geneva, and also with representatives from both Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Health. And they were actually really positive about the idea, seeing that there were so many youth from the IFMSA side, IPSF side, but also to have that youth voice represented in their own delegations as well. So we followed up on that after the WHA ended. And the year after, in 2017, we actually had the first youth delegates participating as part of the Dutch delegation. And since then, I think the general evaluation has also always been very positive, in a sense that they say like the youth bring a really new perspective to the table. It's something that we sometimes don't think about because we have been in this world for so long. And every year we try to develop the program a little further to see, okay, we already tried this last year. What else can we do to see to really increase youth engagement in other spaces than just the WHA? And with regards to concrete advice that I have for you is, well, everything Sarah already said is something I do agree with, but some things that I experienced as a youth coordinator of the youth delegate program. So I'm not the youth delegate, but the person in charge of the long-term sustainability of the program, is to realize that what are our strengths as youth, because we have a lot to add compared to what the people in the ministry of the member states representatives can do. And don't underestimate yourself, because we are really, really quick to talk ourselves down and say like, oh, we didn't study for this, we have no experiences, so we don't know anything about it. But in that sense, there's also a lot of things, a lot of new developments in the global health arena that we know much more about than, well, the older generation, if I can say it like that. And so really know your strengths and know that you have those areas of knowledge that they don't have, and come across prepared and be aware that you have these things, and be self-confident that you can talk about these things and convince them and really make a difference there. I think I would just stop there.
Yes. I think that actually that the Dutch example is a very great example of how WHA specifically plays a role, because you're going to find out about this when you're there in Geneva. When you go up to your national delegations and you say, hey, I'm from Portugal, I am a medical student, and I've come here all the way to tell you about these youth delegate programs, they will take your word with a lot of consideration, because they don't know that there are unpaid students going around the world trying to convince global health leaders that something is right or wrong. So you really should take your word in high consideration, because that's how people will look at you when you are in Geneva. Then we move on to Toby. Toby, what's your biggest advice?
Hi, everyone. First and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me all the way from Canada. I feel so included. My 3 advices. The first advice I have in terms of establishing anything, not just Canadian Youth Delegate Program, is that you have to recognize that when you're starting something out, from the beginning, it's never going to be, it's going to be grandeur at the beginning, right? It's going to require a lot of legwork. So, and when you're establishing a program, as the delegate program, just recognize that before it's formalized, before it's really recognized by any organization, you're probably going to start informally. Okay, and that's really the first advice. The second advice after that is then to use metrics to make sure that the progress, the roundtables, the advocacy is somehow measurable. When it's measurable, it's provable. If it's provable, that's when you have, leverage to negotiate and to persuade. Advocacy is, I think, so important, but sometimes neglected with the fact that it needs to have some sort of a metric to actually convince people that has merit. And I think the third advice, just as what the previous speaker said, is that don't underestimate yourself. Youth is the future. Youth are making up, one of the most diverse populations in the world, and early professionals bringing so much innovation from different perspectives, coming from a PhD program, more in research. Through my delegate role, I've come to realize, the diversity in youth, the thinking, the innovation, the creativity. There's a lot to leverage. And once you recognize there's a lot to leverage, then all the steps just follow into place. But just to recognize, number one, you can start from the bottom and then you'll get to the top. Second, use something to measure. Try to always have some sort of a metric to, demonstrate how successful you are as a group. And third, and is the most important one, is that youth is the asset. There's so much out there. And to make sure you're not just, leveraging within a niche. I think that's part of the difficulty, is making sure that when you are advocating for youth priorities, that you are looking from people from all over, not from expertise to lived experience. Thank you, and that's my response to that.
Thank you so much, Toby, and thank you for putting here something about doing things informally even before they are formally recognized. Me and Toby have had interesting discussions on this, but maybe you can ask later for specific examples of what can you get to them to showcase that you will do good. Not only convince them that you will do good and then come with the evidence for that. Try to gather the evidence before heading for the advocacy. Thank you so much for this first round of presentations. Meanwhile, I have a surprise for me, for the remaining speakers, and for everyone attending, which is we had a last-minute confirmation from Miriam. Miriam is a youth delegate to the PreWHA from Germany. And so we will be looping her in. Oh, here is Miriam. So although she didn't have the time to prepare previously the questions, we will be looping her in because I think it's only added diversity to this panel of speakers. Miriam, the first round of questions was just on the biggest advice you could leave to someone who's going in 1 week to Geneva to try and convince their delegations that they should include a youth representative in the future. Do you have any special advice on this?
Yeah, I think I can only follow along what my colleagues have said or what the other youth delegates or coordinators have said. I think the most important thing is to not get discouraged. I think in Germany, the youth delegate program is pretty new, so I'm only the third youth delegate. And I come across a lot that people are like, who even are you? A lot of people don't know that the youth delegate program exists. So there isn't really resistance against incorporating youth knowledge or youth inputs, but they just don't know about it. So I think it's really important to go out there, speak to people, actually try to network, try to get youth inputs into the discussion, and not get discouraged when people are like, I didn't even know that you existed. So advocate for yourself, advocate for youth people, young people, and then try to make the most out of your of the youth delegate program, because I feel like there isn't too much resistance, at least in Germany, but there is just no knowledge about the youth delegate program. And there's actually a lot of space for youth to be input. You just have to kind of crawl your way or claw your way into it. And I think that's something, like, be persistent, bring youth input to the discussion, and then people are actually pretty enthusiastic about it.
Thank you so much for the advice. And by the way, we'll have most of the audience here in the attempt to establish a youth delegate program. Seldom are the people that have already established, but we spoke about something interesting, which is after establishment, you have to make the most of it to guarantee that you still have something to prove on what you're doing. And I think that at least the Dutch and the Canadian youth delegate programs have presence on social networks. Am I right? I don't know if either the Lebanese or the German are there as well. Sarah, Miriam, are your youth delegate programs also on social networks?
Like it's on LEMSIC pages. It's not an
Oh, okay.
independent page.
Okay. What about you, Miriam?
It's like accompanied to the Federal Ministry of Health, so we don't
Okay.
really have anything apart from that.
Okay. I don't know what's the best way to do it, but I know that the Dutch and the Canadian have a specific page for the youth delegate of that country. Okay, so meanwhile, I've just understood that it is much nicer for us to be the five of us here speaking to the audience than me having a shared presentation with only the question. So I'll just go get the second question, bring it here, and afterwards, the methodology for questions is that people can open their microphone or speak on the chat box, and I will be posting the question here orally. Okay, and so the second question is, what's your best first-hand experience as a youth delegate until the moment? And let us just remind that here we have people who have already attended as IFMSA delegates and as actual youth delegates, and we have people who haven't yet attended these meetings. So they will have different kinds of experience, but be that in the preparation or in the follow-up, I believe they will have some highlight to bring us. So I will do precisely the same. I will move one person forward. And so now we start with Siming, then Toby, then Miriam, and then Sarah. Simon, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the great question. I have a kind of one best experience that I had, and I have two examples of it to like illustrate how it worked. And one thing that I would like that really energizes me in the sense of working for youth engagement is the fact that there are a lot of allies out there, and they're also not in spaces that you would expect them, and it's also not often the people you would expect them to be. But there are a lot of people around that really believe in youth engagement, and it's not just young people. The first example I have was when I was attending the Regional Committee for Europe last September. And we were just going around talking to other non-state actors, and they would be asking like, hello, where are you from? And we would be like, hello, we're from IFMSA, the Medical Students Association worldwide. We represent 1.3 million medical students. And then everyone was like, wait, you represent over 1 million medical 1 million medical students worldwide, and you're just standing here talking to us like this? Why are people not listening to you? And this didn't happen just once or twice, it was multiple times, because all those other organizations also realized there are so little other organizations that have that big of a group that they represent, and us medical students and future health professionals are so important for the future of healthcare. There are a lot of people there that really believe in us as well. So I think that's something that's really empowering for me and really changed my mind about, okay, I'm not just some young people asking to be here, and it will be very kind if they let me be here, but I have a right to be here in that sense. And then the second example that I have is also kind of related to this, which was in our Dutch Ministry of Health, where one of the high-level ministry staff, I was just talking to her, and she was just saying, it's more or less a direct quote translated from Dutch, but she's saying, yeah, youth engagement is not just a favor, but we really need it. We owe it to our next generation, and it's where the energy lies to make real changes that we need right now in this world, where so many things are happening. And there was one of the highest officers up there, and she was saying, like, I especially want to hear your opinion when we're talking about these discussions, because you're the young people, and we have been doing things like this for ages, but we don't know what the next generation wants, and that's really where we want to go. So even there, we might run into some difficulty sometimes, but even there's a lot of people that really do want to see that change from the youth happening as well. I think that's where I will end my answer.
Thank you so much, Siming. So sharing a great story on people actually understanding the relevance of really including youth because of the higher impact they will have on the years that are to come. And in the end, I would like to give a note on the specificities of representing medical students, but I will leave it to the end because your input is more relevant. So Toby, go ahead.
I also have two, particular moments in time where, I kind of think about when I think about my overall delegate experience. The first one is in Canada. Recently, sometime this year, the government had organized a pandemic forum, bringing together civil leaders, government leaders, and they also include myself among youth to attend this pandemic forum and to discuss about the pandemic agreement in detail from different perspectives. And being able to attend this meeting among perhaps 10 other youth and being able to bring the priorities of Canadian youth to this table was just mind-blowing to me. And it kind of reminded me how important it is to bring youth advocacy to organizations, to government, because if we're not there, we're not going to be represented. And it kind of helped me actualize and realize how important it is. So that's my first experience. But my second experience really comes through my roundtables. As through a youth delegate role, part of my role is that I run roundtables with youth from across the country. So to date, I've had the privilege of hosting about 15 roundtables, of which I've engaged to approximately 120 or 115 Canadians from across the country. Now, one of the approaches I've done to engage youth is not just to only facilitate the policy discussion, but sometimes to create space. So one of my favorite roundtables is actually one on Indigenous youth. And in that roundtable, of course, I'm not Indigenous, and realizing the issues, among Indigenous youth and the health inequities. What I did with that session is I, introduced myself, I introduced the purpose of the roundtable, but then I gave my facilitator role to an Indigenous youth, a person that has much more experience than me about the issues and had much better ties with the Indigenous community. And that is one of my favorite experiences as the youth delegate, because you start to realize that, this role comes with all privilege. And as my colleague said, anyone that speaks to you, they will, at first sight say, wow, that's amazing. But when you recognize that you have privilege, and when you can share that privilege with someone who can share, their lived experience or their expertise, that has something to share, it is so powerful. It is so powerful because, coming from, one part of the world, from one field of the world, from one expertise of the world, I'm always going to be, I'm going to have some sort of a blind spot. And that's something you have to recognize as a, youth delegate. And once you recognize it and you take your privilege and you share it with somebody else, it really makes a difference. And, I believe, after I finish that role, that will be the highlight, is being able to create space for youth that need it. Thanks, Francisco.
You're welcome. Not only of highlighting this thing that happened during roundtable consultation, but also of mentioning roundtable consultations, because this is something that we usually don't give that much focus, but I hope there are questions later on. Actually, Canada has one of the most systematized way of doing roundtable consultations. And this is one of those examples that Toby had mentioned, that you can gather the evidence before establishing the youth delegate program. And roundtables is an example of what you can do before going ahead and try to convince the government to introduce youth representatives. Miriam, do you have a highlight for your experience?
I think the German youth delegate program is still a little underdeveloped, or it's still in the making. So I think something that has been really cool for me has been that I kind of got a bit of freedom to decide in what kind of direction I want to steer the youth delegate program. And as Toby said before, I also wanted to make it a little more measurable. I wanted to produce like actual concrete results. And as part of that, I've been doing a survey and also youth consultations, and summing those experiences and responses up in a policy brief for the German Federal Ministry of Health. And that has been, I think, a lot of fun, as Toby said, like actually speaking to German youth, getting their input on different topics that will be discussed at the upcoming World Health Assembly. I think that has been really important for me to just get actually an insight into what German youth think. So because in my mandate, it says that I should represent German youth, which I think is a hard thing to do with considering there are a lot of Germans and a lot of German youth. So I've been trying to live up to that. But I think, like really speaking to German youth and then trying to, represent their perspectives within political discussions. I think that has been really difficult, but also really rewarding. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, Sarah, you have already been a youth delegate for 1 year ago. What's your highlight from that experience?
I mean, it's very hard to choose a highlight. Like being a youth delegate is a highlight by itself. But I guess our like the main highlight was our the trust that we've built with the ministry, if I'm gonna say. So them, first of all, believing in us as youth, empowering us, including us, and meaningfully engaging us within the country delegation. So through statements, we delivered 6 out of 9 statements during the World Health Assembly, through having regular meetings with the Minister of Health, consulting us for our opinions, for our stances on certain topics. So this empowerment was really motivating, and also this also contributing in us believing in our governments. So as you know, we come from a region that is prone to conflicts, and there's a lot of mistrust in our governments. And I remember when we came back from the youth, from the WHA, and we had a press release with the ministry, one of our LAMSIC members mentioned this is one more reason for us to stay, because as you know, youth are traveling abroad, they are leaving our country to secure better futures. So just seeing the trust that we've established with the government, seeing how the government is empowering its youth, and seeing how much we can take back and contribute to the government itself and to our country was in itself really rewarding. And I guess also the aftermath of the youth delegates program itself was also a highlight, because based on that experience, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the ministry. So that enabled us to be included in other parts of decision making or national governance, such as it's consulting and actually helping the ministry actually write a UHC framework, for example, but also for the other youth delegates to come. So we have this year in the WHA, we have 6 youth delegates. We have 3 from Lebanon, but we also have 3 who are from public health majors. So 3, I mean, from LAMSIC, and 3 from public health majors. So it's 6 youth delegates instead of 3. So that just means how much the ministry actually appreciated youth, actually appreciated the incorporation of youth within their delegations, and appreciated our ideas as well. So I'm gonna be short and sweet and brief.
Thank you so much, Sarah. First of all, I didn't know of this evolving in Lebanon, and that there were 3 people coming from public health crisis. That
Yeah.
is so nice. And with this being said, and so interesting that for Sarah, one of the highlights was really in the aftermath. With this being said, I would just like to say the 2 things that I kept on for myself so that you could speak. The first of them is youth delegate programs in the midst of other relations with organizations or the government from your country. Just like Sarah said, the fact that there was a youth delegate program created the confidence so that youth would be involved in other processes, like creating that policy document on universal health coverage. And the same can go the other way around. Sometimes it's good for you to establish lower volume relations with your government that will create and inspire in them the confidence that they will take you to Geneva and pay for your accommodation and pay for your flights, etc. So it can go one way or the other, but one kind of interaction is always beneficial for the future. And the second thing I would like to say goes to Simeng, goes to everyone, but is based on what Simeng said, because most of us, most of you in this delegation are medical students, and for the good and for the bad, you will notice that along the way that medical students are sometimes regarded very highly in representing the youth interested in global health. It doesn't mean that there is not other youth interested in global health, but there is still this idea in most people's minds that medical students are an ex-libris of youth in health representation. So of course you should try to represent all the youth interested in global health, but whenever the fact that you are a medical student plays to your advantage, just sell that idea out and make people understand that you are really interested in it. These are the 2 ideas that I got from your comments that I thought could be good to bring up. So meanwhile, it's time for now questions from the audience. We have already 1 question from Mustafa. I will be summarizing it and posting it to the audience, but you can leave your questions meanwhile. Okay. So Mustafa is from Iraq, and this is what he asks. So what are your remarks on establishing contact with the ministry during the regional committee? Is it good or is it bad? And do you have to take special things into consideration? This because maybe Mustafa thinks that the WHA or the executive board meeting is too high of a stage to get the attention from these people. So maybe the regional thing is more easily accessible. From my understanding, Sarah and Sinan have already been to regional committee meetings. Toby will be attending a regional committee meeting. And I think Miriam's role in Germany doesn't include attending a regional committee. So maybe we go to Sarah and Simeng first. First Sarah, then Simeng. Then we go to Toby and Miriam, of course, if you want to add something, just feel free to do so. Okay? Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mustafa, for the question. It's actually very interesting. I think it depends because, like, as you know, we established contact. Actually, how did we establish contact? It was based on the WHO EB meeting, not the WHA. And after that, we contacted like the permanent mission and the UN and then the ministry. So it could be any WHO meeting could be have an opening or an opportunity to contact your ministry. However, in the regional committee meeting, it's a bit, I find it difficult because sometimes the number of delegates attending is really limited, and non-state actor contribution is also limited depending on the context. So for example, in the WHO RC69 meeting, non-state actors were only attending online. So that means we really didn't have that much contact or networking with our let's say member states or with our countries in person, which would have made all the difference. So online contact is different than in-person networking and contact. So I would assume that the World Health Assembly, especially because it's in person, and especially because you have this chance to network in person, would be a much better option. Unless in the regional committee will have an in-person networking opportunity, it would be also beneficial. So I think it depends on the context, but in both cases, any WHO honestly meeting is an opportunity to network and to contact your country representatives. I hope that answered your question.
Sorry, thank you so much for making the case for the fact that this might depend even more on the format of participation than on the kind of meeting. Do you have an experience that it goes according to this in a different way?
Yeah, I think maybe to highlight another point of how to approach these government officials in official meetings is also to think about, because what I read in your questions, there may be some people who are more reluctant to take on the spaces and talk to you as youth. But I think it's also important to emphasize on the similarities between you. So, for example, being a medical student from the same country as they are, sometimes it also helps, like for us, we have interns, student interns as well, that work with ministry, who like are more closer in like experiences to you as medical students. And maybe that's like a lower, like an easier way to get into conversation with the ministry or member state officials as well. So I think it also depends on like using multiple ways of reaching out to the relevant people who are who have a say in establishing a youth delegate program, to see like maybe if the ministry isn't that receptive, you can try the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, or like what Sarah said, the permanent mission in Geneva is also an option, for example. So I think it's also comes back again to what Miriam said before about perseverance. Like you will come across a lot of barriers in the beginning, but there is someone there who will be open to listening to your story at least. And it's about finding that person.
Thank you so much. Toby, do you have already an idea of this, even though you still haven't attended PreWHA?
Yeah, I don't think I would be able to comment on specifics because I have yet to attend the PreWHA. But I would say in terms of, you know, the basics with trying to start up with anything is, number one, these government officials are also human. Yeah, we have to recognize that. And there are going to be government officials that, you know, are a bit resistant. And there are going to be government officials that do care and want to support youth. Find those people. Those are your allies. And when you come to them, come prepared. Be able to provide some sort of a metric. Be prepared to provide some sort of an idea to move forward. And to make sure that, you know, whatever you're proposing has an output that will contribute, you know, to the better society. And I think that's my response, Francisco. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you so much. Miriam, do you have any input to this, or we'll leave it for the next one? Yeah. Thank you so much for economizing the time. So I would give 7 more minutes for questions and answers, because the 5 minutes really have to be me disclosing on this session and making some final summary of what we have to study at home, not only to listen to this debate. So I will pick the question from Caroline. I'll ask everyone to reply in 30 seconds or less, if so. So Caroline really makes a question of you as youth delegates. are you really heard by the government and let's say the national delegation, for example, or you think there's here some kind of tokenism in including you but not really taking your opinion into account? Does any of you have especially good or bad experience in these terms? And we will go with Toby, Miriam, Sarah, Simon. Toby, go ahead.
To that question, I would say, communicate, talk with your government officials, understand what are the issues that they're facing in terms of, creating these interventions for global health priorities. Meet them where they're at, ask them what they need, and provide it to them. Start this discussion from the beginning. Understand priorities, understand standards. Are we on the same page in terms of our expectations and what is needed, and to provide it?
Thank you so much. Miriam.
Yeah, I think definitely there has been some negative opinions from the government in terms of what I should do. In terms of that, I definitely think there is at least some people do think like I'm just here to I don't know, be seen by other delegations or just to be as a token. And I think there's still some change that has to happen there. And I think that's also something that we can do. We can like show we can have a positive impact. So I don't think that's to be like stopping you, but actually to kind of like see what are their perspectives, why don't they want your perspectives to be input. So I think there's a lot of positive things that could come from that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sarah. So you already said that you did 6 of the 9 statements that were right at the last WHA, so I hope it's a good experience.
No, it was an amazing experience actually, and I think what helped was exactly what Toby mentioned: is define expectations, clear expectations from the beginning. So in our meetings, when we had concrete ideas on how we could actually contribute within the youth delegate, youth delegation, the ministry actually were more, let's say, at ease in involving us, because they we know what we're doing. We already have, as I said, experience because we already attended WHAs before, so we already know, for example, about statement writing, etc. So it was positive because we also tended to like be very clear on what we expect from our involvement, not only to attend but also to contribute, and that is something very important to highlight while you're doing your first initiation meetings with the ministry.
Okay, Simon, what about you?
Yeah, I think maybe not to repeat others, but I think also for us, what we also use in our negotiations with the government is that, of course, we will not say anything that's not out of line with what the Dutch government agrees on. But what they also recognize and what we recognize is the fact that we are youth delegates and we're not government officials, gives us a certain level of freedom also to say certain things and to ask for certain things. For example, in the WHA, but also in government preparations, because we come from a bit different perspective. And they recognize that as well and say like that's also a strength and something that we can work with. So in that sense, yeah, that's maybe something I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Simon. So right now we have 2 pending questions on the chat box. But I really think that most of the questions in these two text messages are answered by the presentation I'm going to do just afterwards, because there's a lot of content in the IFMSA resources that gives an answer to these. So Sanai and Sirine, worry not that is not going to be answered by each of these people, because by listening to the part I'm going to present now, you'll be listening to the opinion of 8 youth delegate programs and not only of 4. Okay, so this being said, I will share once again my screen and I will be going to the closing of this session. This will be a debriefing focusing mostly on the kind of resources we have to offer, which you can take home, study, and become more effective by doing so in advocacy for youth delegate programs. So once again, I will be sharing my screen. Oh no, this is the warning slide I was looking for in the internet to send you a message. You just spotted me. And so I'm going back to slideshow. I hope you can see me. So I would like to end this session on, okay, we've had a very good experience, first-hand experience of people who have been or are going to be youth delegates. You were able to pose the questions, but now it's interesting to know that many of the questions which you might come across while preparing your advocacy strategy are in things that have already been compiled So two relevant resources on youth delegate programs. The first of them is the IFMSA WHO Youth Delegate Toolkit, which has the 101, the basics of how to start this, what struggles am I usually finding, how can I overcome them. So if you're starting this, or if you are going for the advocacy part of this process, please read this before. You will find there the showcasing of benefits for the youth and for the member states. This is a good thing for being able to showcase that you are right in trying to convince them for your delegate program. You will have a step-by-step guide summarizing what you have to go through to make sure this happens. But let's never forget that no one size fits all. The government of Iraq is very different from the government of Germany, of Netherlands, of Canada, etc. And then there's some basic principles that are suggested. The second tool I would like to propose, and this is the one that really gives an answer to a lot of things and tries to meet two things. So a success stories full tries to meet first the objective that you want an answer to your practical doubts. So how have other countries done it? How is the selection process? How many are done? How long are the terms? With this, with access to this success stories folder, you will be able to know how Lebanon does it, how Canada does it, how Germany does it in a very systematic way. Okay. But not only does it give you the answer to your practical doubts in all these questions and even the funding process. Yeah, I was forgetting about the funding process. It also, at least I think that way, it also tries to give you the answer to the first question that you will receive. Because I suppose the first question you will receive when you try to implement this is, why should we implement a youth delegate program in our country? And if you can reply to this question with, because it's been implemented with success in many countries for many years, I hope that they do come with a positive reply to your request for youth delegate program. Okay, so both for you to get better acquainted with what you can propose, but also for the people who are going to approve this, the government of your country, to be sure that yes, other countries have done it, we will be equally successful. So take home messages in these last 2 minutes. This is important because it increases the effectiveness of your advocacy, because you have the access to a delegation with a voting right and not only with a statement in informal lobbying right. And also in the way it provides many learning opportunities. I'm not guessing that Sarah or Toby or Miriam or Simin just got into this because they had a very robotic, mechanical objective of improving efficacy. I'm pretty sure that they will take from here interesting experiences that will make them better people, better professionals, and make them access future opportunities. How to do it? Go through the resources that IFMSA has, then read the success stories, and of course, IFMSA, me as a focal point for youth delegate programs, will always be available for any question you have. If there are any further questions, you have 3 minutes to pose them. Of course, me and the remaining youth delegates that have been here showcasing will be fully available, and feedback will be appreciated either now or through the systematic process that the organizing committee will send to you as a link. So finally, I would just like to thank Sarah, Simeng, Toby, and Miriam for joining. I think it was a very interesting debate, and I hope this was a good hybrid session of theoretical presentation and then mixed with the experience that these youth delegates have had to share with you. I hope that you, the audience, also had a good experience, and I will be now stopping my screen sharing so that be it through the chat or through opening the microphone, you can still post some final questions if you have in the last 2 minutes. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Francisco. Thank you so much to all our delegates, young delegates who are here and inspiring us to implement and work more towards youth advocates and in global health. So our members here present, do you have any other questions in the remaining 2 minutes that we have? Well, I guess that that's it for now. In case we receive any other questions,